Welcome to Dabo Recap. Enjoy your viewing. In front of us was a young man with red hair. He started swearing. He was clearly dissatisfied with something and could not understand something. This man looked at himself in the mirror and was stunned. After all, the body he was in belonged to a fictional character, a young master. The dissatisfaction on his face began to manifest itself even more and more. He screamed. He couldn't understand why he was in this particular body. After all, this body belongs to one of the worst heroes of his novel. It was Hyuk Ryong's body. Una is the weakest master and the villain of the martial arts novel. And part-time, this character is a young master of a demonic sect. But what the hell? He was in his spacious chambers and began to think about something. Our hero began to calm himself down and put his thoughts in order. It turns out that his real name is Lee Si-woon. He was an ordinary citizen from Korea. He was already 32. And then our hero looked at himself in the mirror again and continued to be surprised. Some kind of devilry. How could a person get into a work he himself created? He continued to think. Apparently something contributed to this event because there must be some kind of logic. He began to remember how, as a person in the real world and in his real body, he cleaned his house. And in the end, he was finally able to sort out all his things. He reached out to his drink, which was on the table, and began to summarize the move. Sipped his drink and stared at the screen of his smartphone. And for some reason unknown to us, he was very surprised. On one of the social networks, he saw someone's post. It reported that a celebrity named Yo So-ra fell into a coma after a tragic accident. She was an actress. Our hero was not happy with such news. And then, suddenly, the things that were lying on his table jumped up and fell to the floor. Our hero thought that lately everything was somehow not calm and strange things were happening. After which he leaned towards his fallen laptop. And one could see how the surprise on his face simply knew no bounds. The laptop screen was brightened. It somehow turned on by itself. And then a folder flashed on the screen. It was called Hero Lee Si-yoon. A very expressive smile appeared on our hero's face, which stood out. He remembered his past. After all, it was a folder with an unfinished novel that he had been working on 10 years ago. And in general, why has this folder not been deleted yet? Next, he decided to read this novel in order to remember what it was about. To the utmost surprise of our wonderful hero, it turned out that suddenly some kind of inscription appeared on the screen in front of our hero. Everything sparkled with a blue light, and our hero was teleported somewhere. That's how he ended up in the body of one of the characters in his unfinished novel, and even with a mirror in his hands. It was the body of a young guy. He had red, thick hair. But our hero was not interested in this. He wanted to understand. Will he have access to the memory of this character? He felt unwell. He lowered the mirror and continued to sit on the bed in the chambers of the owner of this body. But still, he accepted this and realized that now he is Hyuk Ryong-un, and part-time the fourth master of the demonic sect. And then something very interesting flashed through our hero's thoughts. He howled in pain and did not understand what was happening to him now. A picture of the memories of the owner of this body appeared before him, about how he had fun with some 2 girls, and how he didn't shy away from offending and beating homeless people if he wanted to, and also how he preferred drinking in the company of beautiful ladies to daily training. He took his head and realized that these were the very memories that the character of his short story had lived through. And then he remembered that the owner of this body is a minor character. But despite all this, the character of his wonderful short story came out with rottenness. But as it were, the essence of the situation was something else. One could notice how suddenly wild horror settled in our hero's eyes. He was very confused and started looking around as if something had happened. And it turned out that our hero was able to realize something for himself. After which he fell to his knees, grabbed his red head and began to scream something. It turns out that despite the status of a young master, this character is quite weak. And the meaning of its existence is only to be a ladder for the main character on the path to the development of his personality. This character is negative, and he must die almost at the very beginning of the novel. Our hero was in a panic. He didn't know what to do. After all, it's clearly too early for him to die. By some miracle, he needs to return to his real body, to the real world. Our hero still continued to stand in the bedroom on his knees, on the floor, and yet he finally began to realize that he was now the fourth master of the demonic sect. Despite the fact that the character is weak, he still has some kind of power in this world. This can be used as an advantage. And also our hero, I realized that it was time for him to get his thoughts together. And he screamed at the top of his lungs. He shouted that in any case he would live and come back. There were servants behind the door who in panic began to drop objects from their hands. It seems their master has gone mad. Our hero looked at himself in the mirror again, being in a new body, and noted that maybe everything was not so bad. Although, one moment still couldn't calm him down. Namely that the character is very weak. You may have to use different techniques such as Mu Drive. The body in which our hero was located could barely stand. Suddenly, a strange feeling suddenly settled in him. The point was, after all, the weakness of the body in which he found himself. And then he suddenly remembered a technique called Heavenly Wave Sword. But you can't just give up. You have to at least try. He began to clench his fists and seemed to feel a surge of chi energy. Suddenly, our hero, who was in someone else's body, decided to stand up. And after that, he even decided to wave his left hand, after which he screamed very loudly. It was not clear why he did this. Then he jumped, after which something really began to happen around him. He realized that something was really working out for him, and was sincerely happy about it. But as it turned out, everything was not as successful as it might seem at first glance. Our hero screamed again, but this time it sounded like he was in hellish pain, and he found himself lying on the floor in an incomprehensible position, all twisted and unable to move. Then he screamed even louder, but this time with the goal of calling for help. To the spacious chambers, one of the servants decided to stop by. I was very horrified when saw him in front of you. Her master Hyuk Ryong-un was in a terrible state. Foam was coming out of his mouth and he was lying crooked on the floor, and around his eyes he was already turning blue. She screamed very loudly because she was shocked by what she saw. The sky was clear, it was still day outside, but some time had already passed. In some room there was a bed, and next to the bed there was a samovar on a stand. And on the bed was the half-dead body of the gentleman, and needles were sticking out of his body. Some old man tried to stage Hyuk Ryong-una on her feet. Finally, our hero woke up. He almost lost his life, although this was due to the fact that the young master's body was neglected. It was not ready for such tests. The gentleman made a grimace and wondered, is the body in which he is located so unsuitable? He began to remember the essence of martial arts techniques, namely sword techniques. It belongs to the Hyukryong family. Thanks to her, most of the leaders of the demonic cult grew up. This technique is not easy. To use it, you need a huge amount of ki energy, and you also need to know in exact sequence the correct sequence of actions necessary to apply it. But our character neglected his training, so he did not even master such basic techniques. He has never pumped up his kai. What can we say about the correct application of techniques? This body is not capable of this. Our hero again began to wonder why he was placed in this weak body and what he did to deserve this. Having barely recovered, for some reason he decided to get out of bed, after which he decided to leave. As it turned out, our hero was heading to some separate building with security at the entrance. He understood that his time was running out and something urgently needed to be done. In this regard, for some reason he decided to look into the library, which was located in that very separate building. After which he went to one of the bookshelves and touched a book. Apparently this was exactly what he needed, so he took it out. This was not the only book needed. He threw everything he needed onto the floor. One of the books he needed and began to look at it. Suddenly he began to understand something for himself. That the book is written in Chinese. Accordingly, he will be able to extract the information he needs. Because, in his real life, he could read Chinese characters. Therefore, he as soon as possible started reading about the demonic cult. It turns out that its representatives do not call their sect by this name. They call themselves the Divine Cult of the Sun and Moon. This cult gained popularity during the Yuan dynasty when they oppressed another people called the Han. The oppressed people settled in the Central Plains and fortified themselves there, after which they were able to free the prisoner of the Yuan dynasty. His name was Yuan Zheng. And then he overthrew the previous government and created his own called Min. But still he had a fear of revenge. He was afraid of the divine power of the cult of the sun and moon, since he knew their power. Accordingly, he expelled the representatives of this cult immediately. They were forced to flee to another place, which was located far from the Central Plains. They barely survived. It was after this that the leader of the third-generation cult developed hatred for those people who drove away his representatives. He developed a plan to regain his power, but he was constantly hindered by the Murima Alliance and the Imperial soldiers. The 15th cult leader named Hyuk Ryong Moon was forced to first occupy the Western Foreign region in order to then approach the Central Plains. And then our hero realized what the reason was for a duel to take place between this character and the main character of his novel. It turns out that a demonic festival is about to take place. Accordingly, Hyuk Ryong Moon would have to report the tactics for attacking the Central Plains, and would also have to choose his successor. Now it's obvious who it will be. Our hero has already begun to regret that he came up with just such a plot for the novel. After the festival, the successor will be forced to advance with an army to capture the Central Plains. And after his failure in the successor competition, Hyuk Ryong-un will decide to be part of the cavalry that will attack the Central Plains. He will go there to prove himself and prove to everyone that he is a worthy candidate. But as soon as he meets the main character of the novel, he will immediately die from just one blow. There is not much time before this event occurs. 2 years. In general, this is the time that needs to be devoted to training so that, being in the body of this character, you do not die. It is for this reason that he needs to do something very urgently, And our hero, of course, came up with one very interesting idea. Suddenly he picked up a piece of parchment and began to lay it out on his desk. And then he picked up a pen and began to write something on this piece of paper. First, you need to compile a dossier of your opponent, namely the main character of the novel. At this time, the same old man who had put the gentleman on his feet was walking across the yard, and next to him was one of the servants. He couldn't believe it. Had the young master really called him to his place to help him in his training? The young master's servant understood the old man's surprise, but still said that everything was so. The old man was even more surprised, because it didn't look like their master. And the sister added that in addition to this, after his awakening, the gentleman began to speak in a language unknown to him, and then he generally took up the pen and began to write. The old man's surprise knew no bounds. After all, the young master had never put pen to paper before and was completely illiterate. He just went even more crazy from what he heard, and his eyes bulged out. And he asked the servant to leave, and then added that it would be better for her not to talk about the latest news. She agreed. The old man, of course, wanted to talk to the gentleman about his behavior, so he immediately rushed to him. But still, having reached the library, he stopped for a couple of seconds in front of its entrance and thought, "It is possible that the reason for this behavior of the gentleman is that he has not yet fully recovered. But what if he again rushes at the old man like a beast? What will he have to do then?" He entered the library and saw something unexpected for him. A young gentleman, sitting on his knees, looking at some notes. Our hero, of course, immediately turned his attention to the old man who appeared. Then he examined him with his gaze and finally greeted him respectfully. There was simply no limit to the surprise on the old man's face. He was stunned. The young master began to look for something, but the old man continued to stand like a pillar and could not believe it. He immediately remembered how the young master threw all sorts of objects at him and insulted him. And then, the young master found what he was looking for, and with a chair in his hands approached the old man. The old man was already scared. Our hero understood everything, but was still surprised. It's impossible to even imagine how ignorant the previous owner of this body was, that the old man is so afraid of him. It was day outside. There were white clouds in the sky and the weather was clear. Our hero was sitting in the library, and opposite him was an old man who was wondering what happened to the gentleman. And then our hero suddenly asked, "Does the old man have a relationship not only with the safety of the master, but also with his financial condition?" The old man replied that both of these things were an integral part of his duties, and the gentleman asked how much he could get for selling everything he had. The old man became worried. He thought that the young master was in some kind of trouble. He suggested to his master that he allow him to personally solve this problem. The young master seemed to understand why he was behaving this way, but still stared at the old man. And he explained that despite all the strange things, everything was fine with the gentleman. The old man continued to try to find out the essence of the problem, because he was very worried about his master. And our hero explained to him that money is a means to all kinds of opportunities. The old man became even more confused. The young master told him not to take too much into his head and answered a simple question. "What is the financial situation of the master?" The old man again asked why he was interested in such things. Our hero tried to explain differently. He said that it was like he had risen from the dead and realized that his life was going downhill, so he wanted to change. After all, after death, all the wealth earned means nothing and will not be useful in the next world. In general, despite the fact that it was difficult for the old man to accept all this, he repeated his question to the old man, and he added that he should not waste time and start selling all the property. Frightened and surprised at the same time, the old man finally agreed. The young master put his palms on the old man's hands to calm him down, and he said that he trusted him, and there was a lot of work ahead, so the old man could already begin to carry out this assignment. The old man was just about to leave, and our hero shouted after him that he should also start keeping records of sales and the amount of money earned. Walking away and looking around, the old man tried to understand what had just happened. And even if this is some kind of reincarnation, all the same, in front of him is a completely different person. Maybe the young master has gone crazy? Several days passed. A very bright sun was shining in the sky. Interesting shaped gold coins sparkled in front of our hero. It was local currency. He had a bunch of these coins in his hands, but this is not all the things sold, and already so much money. But this may not be enough to develop a strategy. There are still 2 years ahead, and therefore we need to prepare thoroughly. He took some strange gray scroll in his hand, and he realized that he doesn't give a damn about the character in his novel. He does all this in order to survive himself. He walked around the room and thought about how much money he had at the moment. If we convert this into modern currency, it would be approximately 2 billion won. This is pretty good, but more is needed. The festival will come in a couple of years, and after it ends, everyone will know about the winner of the competition, after which the main character will appear, who trained for many years in some cave. Accordingly, before these events occur, Hyuk Ryung-un and his body will be fine and the life of this character is not in danger yet. Then our hero began to remember events from his novel, namely how the main character entered one of the caves in the forest. And inside the cave there was some kind of vial with liquid. He took it for himself. Then he took out his sword. Apparently I felt some kind of surge of strength. In the end, the main character of the novel became the strongest after this. Our hero realized that after receiving this drug, the main character of the story will become the most powerful. How corny is this? And then our hero pulled himself together and realized that it was time to start preparing while there was enough time. You need to visit the Heavenly Demonic Library to find out even more. Since this library is the property of the cult, you can get a lot of information about martial arts from it. This information is extremely necessary for our hero in order to survive. The guards who stood at the gates of this library kindly let the gentleman through. There were a lot of books in the library, but this seemed like a trifle to our hero because he expected a larger volume. This means it will take less time than he planned. He collected a lot of books and stacked them, holding them with his hands and leaning them on his chest. And suddenly our hero came across one very valuable and important book for him. It was a book about how to save your life through meditation. He immediately began to study her. It turns out that thanks to this technique you can strengthen your feelings. It's strange that, as the creator of the novel he's in now, he didn't know about this technique before. People who have learned this technique usually discover their sixth sense. It can be used both to evade attacks and to catch your opponent by surprise, and also evaluate the capabilities of other fighters, and also see what others do not see, and thus avoid mortal danger. It turns out that this technique is imbued. We need to master it immediately. Our hero also remembered that the main character of the novel will not master this technique right away. Therefore, you can take advantage of the monopoly on it. This is a very good opportunity. But still, the danger cannot be avoided, because the main character will learn this technique one way or another. And then the young master's gaze fell on something else very, very important. Two more valuable finds. A book of scale armor, and a book about the art of the 9 divine moons. Thanks to the scale armor technique, you can outwear armor and parry blows with a sword. And the second technique allows you to increase your power by as much as 9 times. These are the basics that our hero will need in order to build tactics and save his life. He even joyfully shouted out loud that there was still a chance for life. Therefore, you need to start as soon as possible. Sometime later in the city, a group of people were sitting in one of the establishments. These were young guys with girls. They seemed to be celebrating something. There was a lot of food and drink on the table. One of them asked the other, whose name was Dan Pyong, if he was aware of recent events. He immediately understood what he meant, and replied that according to rumors from other people, Hyuk Ryung-un seemed to have resurrected from the dead. They took him for a local idiot. Another replied that the young master was really out of his head. But still, something clicked in him and he changed. True, it is not clear in what direction the changes occurred. Dan Pyong said with a non-serious expression that it was unlikely that Hyuk Ryung-un could change, and he answered him that as soon as he learned about the return of the young master, he immediately went to see him. But something very strange happened. One of the servants did not let him see Hyuk Ryung-un, saying that the master was busy with something. Dan Pyong asked with a grin, "What urgent business does the gentleman have? After all he does is drink and make trouble." The interlocutor answered him that that was the point. So he decided to check what had happened. And I learned that, as it turned out, the young master spends all his time in the library. Dan Pyong laughed even more. Can this fool really read? And then he added, "It's not like Hyuk Ryung-un is going to ditch them and start his own gang." The interlocutor was no longer as cheerful as before. Was he really? Is it possible that Hyuk Ryung-un will take part in the competition at the Demonic Clan Festival? Dan Pyong was really surprised by all this, to such an extent that he even choked on the drink he was drinking. After which he said sarcastically that as a joke it was quite good. And he added in a joking manner that if the young master participates in the competition and wins, then he, Mokdan Pyong, will become a slave. Everyone who was in this establishment witnessed such a bold statement by Dan Pyong. One of his company said, "If something happens, he will be to blame, because you need to think about what you say." Dan Pyong only laughed at his interlocutors in response to such words. One of their company thought that there must be a reason why no one believes in Hyuk Ryung-un. Meanwhile, our hero continued to study books in the library necessary for survival. But at one point, suddenly, for some unknown reason, his ear began to itch. He thought that someone was mentioning him at the moment, since his ear itched so much. But the theory from books about martial arts is not as useful as practice in this matter. But the young master has no teacher to practice. Our hero still did not give up and continued to immerse himself in his thoughts. After that, he decided to do a warm-up. He got up from the floor and stretched well. And for some reason he ran somewhere, because he remembered that he still knew one teacher. But why the hell didn't he realize this moment much earlier? It was obvious. Sunset was approaching in the sky, and an old man, whom our hero had entrusted with managing his fortune, was walking around the yard. He turned around because I heard some screams in my direction from behind. It was the young master, and he was glad that he found this old man so quickly. A little later, our hero instructed his guards to find people from the list and added that they should not hesitate. The old man looked at the list and asked in surprise, "Why all this?" The young master proudly replied that these people were his future teachers. The old man was even more surprised and asked again. The gentleman insisted that these people be brought to him, and he also asked the old man to lead them to the training field as soon as they arrived. The old man was unaware of all this, since he considered these people on the list to be scum, but he accidentally said it out loud, and could no longer take his words back. Our hero's eyes were worth 5 kopecks. As soon as our hero found himself at the training site, he was not happy that the owner of this body, Hyuk Ryong-un, abandoned not only himself, but also the site, since he apparently had never been there. He asked the old man how long it would take to bring the site into normal working condition. The fourth master replied that it would take about a whole day and that from tomorrow morning this area would be suitable for training. The young master wished good luck to the old man, but still something very strongly and suddenly alarmed our hero. He began to sniff himself and realized that he had not taken a bath in a very long time because he had been so engrossed in learning techniques from books in the library that he had forgotten about personal hygiene. It got dark outside. A bright yellow light could be seen from the house, illuminating everything around. Our hero sat in the bath and enjoyed himself. It was as if he had been reborn again. But it would seem what else could be surprising. Suddenly, 2 beautiful girls appeared in front of him and began to undress. They offered to help him take a bath. Our hero, barely restraining his desires, politely replied that he did not need it. He said he could handle it himself. One of the girls was very surprised. She asked what happened. The young master waved his hand in their direction and once again asked them to leave, and then completely shouted at them. The girls did not understand at all what was happening to the young master and were very surprised. And then our hero got up from the water and shouted obscenities at them to get out. There was a large and bright moon in the sky, illuminating the dark clouds in the same sky. Our hero was sitting at the table and was not happy that he could not live in peace, knowing that his future was in danger. He looked at the pieces of paper attached to the wall. These were tasks and goals that were needed in order to survive. He understood that if he really wanted to get away with it, and even return to the real world, then he needed to plan everything clearly. And then his thoughts were interrupted by one of the servants. He came to the young master and said that Secretary Jian Murian was already there. Our hero was delighted and said to be brought in immediately. After some time, the secretary was already sitting in front of the young master, and did not understand why the hell this crazy gentleman from the divine cult had called him to him. He scratched his beard and thought about what perhaps the gentleman wanted to charge him with for something. And he began to wonder, what could he have done that would make the young master reprimand him? He looked at the floor, where notes, books, and scrolls lay, and was even more surprised. After all he had heard about the young master was that he was wasting his life. Then it is not clear why in his office there are only notes and books. Our hero bowed his head guiltily and apologized for this mess, and then served tea to the secretary. And he stated that he specifically called him in person to discuss something without prying eyes. After which he apologized again, but this time for the fact that because of this meeting the secretary had to abandon all his work. The secretary was horrified. He was very embarrassed to see the master apologizing to him, so he asked the young master to raise his head. But still he had no idea why the gentleman was so polite to him, to such an extent that he asked our hero to talk to him more harshly, just like before. Our hero raised his head, stared at the secretary, and said that he would follow the secretary's advice, since he wanted it so much. They both sat opposite each other with bulging eyes. An unusual situation has arisen. Our hero assumed that the secretary was burning with curiosity about why he was now at a personal meeting with the young master, and he immediately answered that it was about martial arts. He said he knew the secretary owned some of them. The secretary never ceased to be surprised, and he asked the gentleman what he meant. Our hero placed a book on the table in front of him, on which was written, "Method of Long-Lasting Meditation, Introduction." And he added that this is not a simple book. It contains many unusual techniques that should not be underestimated and should be taken seriously, despite its simplicity. The secretary looked at the book and could not understand what the young master wanted from him. The gentleman explained to him that he was one of the authors of the operating instructions for the first martial arts, who knew everything from the divine cult. More specifically, he is interested in the technique of long-term meditation. Despite the fact that our hero has already managed to study this book, he still understood little. The secretary still could not understand anything, and therefore was in a stupor. On the contrary, the young master had a very confident and insidious look. He sat down on the table closer to the secretary and said that he wanted to be his student. He was even more surprised. He did not understand what was happening and what exactly they wanted from him. The secretary began waving his hands in front of the gentleman and explaining that this was not possible. And the young master looked at him and asked the secretary, had news reached him about what he, Hyokryong-un, was like before? The secretary confirmed this, and said that indeed the young master was characterized as weak and the worst in the entire history of his cult, and also that he takes advantage of the weakness of others and is a madman, and also that the young gentleman is a drunk and a womanizer. And then he interrupted. It was clear on his face that he clearly did not want to allow himself to say such things in front of the young master. And the young master surprisingly replied that he should not worry, because everything was fine now. And he added that he needs to gain strength, but he has little time, and therefore he needs to master all the techniques of his cult as quickly as possible. And he also said that he understands the importance of the basics, and also understands that it is better not to rush. The secretary shed tears of happiness, and he firmly stated that he agreed with the young master. A sly look formed in our hero's eyes. He had carefully thought through this conversation before it took place, so everything went according to plan. He said he was aware of the rumors about him, as if he thinks the same as a member of an orthodox sect, therefore no one from the cult can support him. And he is embarrassed because he, as the fourth young master of the cult, himself contradicts the ideas of this cult. What he heard brought tears to his eyes even more than before. It was as if he saw in front of him a repentant sweet boy who needed help. And then the secretary was forced to speak. He said that he had created his own military techniques, since the cult's techniques were not without shortcomings. But still no one recognizes his brainchild, despite the fact that the cult's martial arts and his own pursue the same goal. He was very happy that it was the fourth young master who became interested in his own techniques, in the creation of which he had invested a lot of effort. Our hero said that he had not yet fully thought through everything he had said before, and suddenly, the secretary fell to his knees and bowed to him. It turns out that the secretary felt ashamed for not taking the young master seriously, and also for doubting the master's power. Our hero put his hand on his shoulder to make him feel more comfortable, and he tried to calm him down, saying that he was very important for their cult, so there was no need to worry so much. And he added that they have common interests. They both can improve the martial arts of the cult. Therefore, we must not lose this opportunity. The secretary was ready to give even his life for such an idea. He thanked the gentleman for this opportunity. Our hero looked at him and realized that everything went more perfectly than planned. But still, he did not expect the secretary to be so frank. Perhaps this secretary is even rethinking his life at the moment. But the reason for choosing such a strange teacher is not only this. As the author of his novel, our hero also remembered another personality of Jiang Murian. He was the greatest fighter, who was also called the demonic tactician. Simply put, our hero needs such a powerful mentor. The moon in the sky became even much brighter than before. Our hero made a list of his teachers, and the first was Jiang Murian. He marked it as valid. He stood smugly at the window in his hands with his notes, and was glad that he managed to lure such a powerful ally to his side. After all, this is one of the best geniuses of some hero's path. Once upon a time, the second young master also chose him as his ally. After all, it was thanks to him that he was able to catch the main character of the story in a trap. Because of this, Jiang Murian was nicknamed Demonic Tactician. In addition, after the second young master became the heir to the demonic cult, he distinguished himself very much and took an important part in the war against the Murim alliance. In general, he left a very important mark in the history of the cult. And then our hero began to praise himself, thinking about how cool the script he had created. But still he realized that he was very distracted, and he began to think about the next stage of his big plan. But he immediately fell on the bed because of fatigue and realized that he really wanted to sleep. Morning came. The sky was clear as always and clouds could be seen on it. Jiang Murian couldn't believe his eyes. He saw something interesting in front of him. On the table in front of him lay a pile of notes, scrolls, and books. A gentleman stood nearby and said that he would have the honor of being the mentor of the young master, and the notes that were on the table were needed in order to study the theory and prepare well. The secretary immediately began to examine one of the scrolls and noted that despite the importance of these records, they only contained information on how to eat properly and not overexert yourself, and also information about sleep, some strange techniques. The gentleman replied that he had identified some shortcomings by studying the records of the cult's techniques. Therefore, he needs to get rid of these shortcomings as soon as possible. And then he asked again, demonstrating himself, is maintaining the form really not so important? After all, a person is what he eats. Yes, and maintaining tone is important. Jiang Murian was delighted and said that martial arts are truly based on the condition of the human body. It turns out that he did not attach any importance to this, despite the fact that he devoted himself to martial arts for decades. And now he has seen the light thanks to the young master, who not so long ago was a terrible bore. The trick is that our hero compared all this with the real world, where athletes train and adhere to both a regimen and proper nutrition. It's strange that such a great character as the demonic tactician fell for such a trick. The gentleman smiled and invited the secretary to begin his plan, namely to improve the techniques of his clan. Jiang Murian agreed with this. They were training. The gentleman was doing push-ups, and the secretary was monitoring the correctness of the exercise. When the young master was doing pull-ups on the horizontal bar, the secretary stood nearby and gave motivational speeches. The same goes for other exercises. Our hero even began to get a little mad from such motivation. Our hero trained Hyuk Ryung-un's body in real-world ways for just a couple of weeks, and yet there was already progress. Maybe it's because our hero is in the body of a descendant of the greatest cult leader and has good genes. Jiang Murian still stood nearby and motivated him with the fact that there was very little left. Our hero, continuing his training and running across the field, said that it was so. The secretary stood watching the gentleman and stubbornly wrote some notes in his diary. It turned out that he made changes to the training program to adjust it to the young master. The fact that Hyuk Ryung-un's body was getting better and better could not but please our hero. It was getting close to evening. In front of the building stood one of the guys from the same company in which they discussed Hyuk Ryung-un's changes, and then took turns with him and drank. He looked at the house and thought about what the young master did for a living. After all, before, as soon as he finished his business, he immediately went to the brothel to have a good rest, and then an old man appeared in front of him. The guy asked him, "Where is the young master?" He said that the master was busy with training. This guy couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could this damn idiot do something like that? The old man proudly replied that the gentleman had indeed been training for 2 weeks. In the guy's eyes, there was a look of incomprehension of what was happening. After all, Hyuk Ryung-un had always dodged training before. Even when they were both in the heavenly pavilion, where they only study martial arts. Has the young master really gone crazy? He shouted at the old man, saying that it was impossible to believe and that he was lying. Perhaps the reason Hyuk Ryung-un is so persistent is to keep his body in shape. This way he can pick up even more girls. The old man repeated the same thing he had said before, and invited this guy to go with him to see for himself. He was simply confused. He didn't understand what was going on. At this time, on the site, the secretary stood opposite the young master and showed something, and he also noted without exaggeration that his master's fighting qualities were getting better every day. Our hero laughed at what he heard and asked again, "Is it really what he says?" The silhouette of a guy appeared behind the gentleman. He asked a question about what kind of game was going on here. Our hero turned around and addressed the guy by name. The guy's name was Sangwon-hu. The gentleman asked this guy why he came. From the memories of Hyuk Ryung-un, our hero already knew that this guy was a member of the 4 divine gangs. Cooperation with these gangs is pointless and ineffective. But the fact that one of the gang members would show up to him personally was a surprise for our hero. Sangwon-hu asked the young master in surprise why he had not spent time with them for a long time, because they had communicated together before. He replied that everything is obvious, because training takes a lot of time. The guy was a little scared. He asked what it all meant. After all, before the rebirth, Hyuk Ryung-un was a completely different person. Our hero thought that it was unlikely that Hyuk Ryung-un was respected in these circles, since everyone considers him so incompetent. Sangwon-hu continued to express his concern for the young master. He also noted that even the young master's gaze had changed since the last time he was seen in the company. He even put forward a crazy theory that someone had taken possession of Hyuk Ryung-un's body. Our hero thought to himself that this guy might not be so stupid. Nevertheless, he waved his hand towards the guy and said that he could fail if he continued to talk this nonsense, since time is a valuable resource. Sangwon-hu again asked why he was in such a hurry. Our hero replied that he would now tell it like it is. He explained that after he returned to life, he began to think about his past and the meaning of life in general. Therefore, I decided not to waste time and take everything from life. And then the secretary bent a little, his back hurt, and our hero himself began to give a motivational speech about how there is no need to stop. And then he even thought that maybe he had gone too far with it. Sangwon-hu rudely replied that training was not important, and our hero thought that this guy was a good choice for his first opponent to test his strength. Plus, it looks pretty sturdy. And then suddenly, out of the blue, he rushed at this poor guy. Then he jumped over his body, about to deliver a powerful blow. Sangwon-hu's eyes were simply horrified. He even screamed in fear. The young master screamed as if he was doing this for the last time in his life. And Sangwon-hu suddenly flew to the side from such a powerful blow. The blow was very powerful, Probably even our hero did not expect this from himself. But still, on some kind of doubt or disappointment in what he saw arose on his face. His opponent flew to the side, but was able to unexpectedly for him to stand on his own 2 feet. Despite this, Sangwon-hu shouted that this still needed to be stopped. But our hero did not stop there. He decided to take another tee shot. He was just glad to see how much power and strength he had after hard training, and in the face of Sangwon-hu there was still the same horror of what was happening in front of him. He became enraged and tried to strike back at the young master, but the gentleman parried this blow with his right hand without any effort. He even began to mock the guy, asking him how he was feeling, and Sangwon-hu continued to try to strike back. Our hero was pleased, so he asked how long ago that guy fought against strong opponents like the young master. And then, unexpectedly, he invited Sangwon-hu to study together so that he could stand up for himself. The guy asked the young master in surprise whether he was confident in his proposal. Our hero offered him cooperation, which consisted of joint training for a month. After all, he still doesn't lose anything. Surprised, Sangwon-hu asked the same question again. He turned away and said in a touchy voice that the young master had really gone crazy. Our hero repeated again that the duration of joint training would last only 1 month, and then he realized how he could lure this guy, based on the memories of his new body. He said that he could give him some kind of blue horse, which he craved so much. The guy turned around with a malicious smile and asked again whether he understood the essence of the proposal correctly. Our hero stood with a confident look and confirmed what was said once again. He also remembered that Sangwon-hu was pestering Hyuk Ryong-un, so he could take revenge on him. A day later, the sky was clear as before and clouds could be seen on it. Someone was running without stopping around the training area in the yard. It was Sangwon-hu. It was clear from his appearance that he was very exhausted. He was covered in sweat and full of hatred towards Hyuk Ryong-won for making him train so hard. And our hero ran with him and was already ahead, adding that he should move. Sangwon-hu's anger knew no bounds. He said that he had never had such hard training in his life. Jiang Murian stood nearby and answered the guy that he needed to improve his physical condition, which in turn would affect his internal energy. The tired guy asked what kind of nonsense he had just heard. Our hero, still running ahead, said that this is just the beginning. Sangwon-hu was simply in the wildest horror of what he heard. He thought about the fact that they were both from high-ranking families. They tried to instill in them a predisposition to martial arts from childhood, and even forced them to take some kind of drugs. At the same time, none of the methods contained physical activity in its essence. But still, if Hyuk Ryong-un can really improve his physical condition, then, together with everything else, it will give a greater profit. Accordingly, he will be superior to other fighters. The secretary still stood nearby and blew his whistle. And Sangwon-hu simply died from such an intense and unusual training for him. Our hero asked him if he liked the activity, and he hesitated a little. The secretary continued to blow his fucking and hated Sangwon-hu whistle. Then he pointed to Sangwon-hu and said that he needed to run 5 more laps. The guy was clearly not happy, and the young master waved his hand after him and told him to put a little more effort into the training. Thinking that the blue horse will soon belong only to him, Sangwon-hu continued to run. Just 1 month and the horse will belong to him. Jiang Murian showed his notes to our hero. The young master noted that it turned out even better than he expected, and the secretary wondered whether this technique was applicable to the most ordinary fighters. Sangwon-hu, meanwhile, stopped and tried to catch his breath. A smile appeared on Hyuk Ryong-un's face, and he answered the secretary that they could try, because they already had 1 experimental subject. A month later, Sangwon-hu was already lying crumpled on the floor and was exhausted, and our hero and Jiang Murian stood nearby. The young master asked the secretary, "What is there according to the calendar?" He replied that everything was going according to plan and new test subjects would join their training in the near future. They continued to look at the poor guy who was lying on the floor in an incomprehensible position. Sweat poured from him, and barely able to pronounce the words, he said that a month had already passed. And the blue horse? The young master interrupted him and noted that he really deserved what he worked so hard to achieve. Since our hero keeps his word, he replied that Sangwon-hu can take the blue horse. The guy angrily shouted Hyuk Ryong-un's name. Our hero was even a little surprised. Sangwon-hu asked him, "Is the master obsessed with someone else? Even if there are differences between the previous and current master, but..." Our hero thought that the guy was saying the truth, but he wouldn't be able to tell him everything so simply, and the guy wouldn't believe it. The guy asked the young master about his intention to become the winner at the festival. He replied that everything was correct. He said that he changed to win the competition. Sangwon-hu was horrified again and asked again about this moment, and he answered affirmatively that he was the very first contender for the inheritance. The guy, in horror, put his hands on the young master's shoulders and warned him to be more careful with his words. After all, if the master's brother finds out about this, then They will do everything in their power just to make the young master disappear. Sangwon-hu got worried and asked the gentleman to change his mind, because it's not worth it, and you can just have fun and walk like before. Our hero was surprised. He didn't believe that the guy really cared about Hyuk Ryong-woong. He's also a minor character, but why does he speak so convincingly? Will our hero really be able to share his misfortune with him? But still, our hero replied that he really wanted to participate in the competition at the festival. He continued to stand his ground and convince the young master of his decision, and the young master replied that he had really gone crazy, and therefore offered cooperation to this guy. He was even more surprised. After all, it sounded so wild. Our hero explained that he wants to interrupt the tradition of the divine cult, according to which all hopes rest on the eldest son, so the younger sons rest and drink. The guy replied that in principle he was right and everything really was like that. And our hero continued to explain. He added that he just wants to break this damn pattern, although it is not easy. That is why they need to win the competition. And then he said that he needed a colleague who would worry about him more than about himself. Therefore, he invites him to be partners because he trusts him. He stood stunned. He did not believe that this was all happening in reality. He, not knowing what to do, grabbed the young master with his hands and called him a sick moron. And suddenly, he burst into tears. He said that the proposal is great, and they need to stand together against these stereotypical things created by the cult. Our hero was simply dumbfounded by this turn. Once again, his plan worked much better than he expected. Sangwon-hu fought for the young master and began to sob on his chest. Our hero could not understand why it was so easy for him to make others emotional. Maybe because it's a martial arts novel? Or maybe life just treated them so cruelly. Although for our hero, it's even better. He hugged Sangwon-hu and thanked him for his sincerity, and added that he was pleased that he had such a comrade. Sangwon-hu also thanked him for his kindness, and then he asked the gentleman, what should they do? After all, despite the fact that the problem is urgent, there is no solution yet. The young master replied that he had some ideas about this. Sangwon-hu replied that he would help him in any case, no matter what was required of him. Our hero never ceased to be amazed at this guy's devotion. Night had fallen. There was a bright moon in the sky, and gray clouds were still visible, just as before. Our hero stood in front of chests filled to the brim with gold coins. Sangwon-hu rendered our hero a very useful service. Thanks to his contacts, he was able to sell those things that the young master could not get rid of. Now the gentleman has as much as 10 billion won at his disposal. Where did the young master get so much inheritance? Where did he get it all? In general, one problem has been solved, so you can proceed to the next stage. Morning came. As always, clear and with white clouds in the sky. Our hero trained on the site with that same guy named Sangwon-hu. He tried to strike in his direction to demonstrate his strength. Sangwon-hu, as always, he fought back and was very successful at it. Suddenly the guy stood on one leg and began to make some movements. Sangwon-hu jumped up to kick. Our hero was surprised at his abilities. He was delighted with this fight, because even he did not expect such a turn. And Sangwon-hu began to tease the young master to answer him. And then our hero began to approach his opponent in order to take him by surprise. And he dealt him a rather powerful and, as it turned out, successful blow. He hit Sangwon-hu right in the face. He didn't expect this. He fell and started whining about how he couldn't beat Hyuk Ryong-woong and asked for time to rest. The satisfied master agreed with this, because there is still progress from this. And to the surprise of Sangwon-hu, he began to practice blows on himself. Sangwon-hu was stunned. He said that if he showed his skills in the divine demonic pavilion, they would immediately pay attention to him and take him for the best fighter of the cult. Our hero replied that at that time he was not at all interested in this status. Sangwon-hu continued to reminisce about his childhood and said that the young master used to have great hopes and thought that he would become a martial arts genius of the heavens themselves. Our hero did not know what to answer to this, and so he simply remained silent. And in order to understand the essence of what he heard, he began to rummage through the memory of Hyuk Ryong-un. He remembered how as a child he was training, and someone stood behind him and watched. She was a very beautiful and young woman. Her face was illuminated by the bright sun. At this time, little Hyuk Ryong-un punched someone in the face. His then opponent found himself lying on the ground and immediately surrendered. Hyuk Ryong-un turned and saw that another man was standing next to that beautiful woman. This man praised the boy. Apparently it was his father. And the woman was also delighted with the young man's skills. This was very flattering to little Hyuk Ryong-un, because it's nice to be praised. But one terrible rainy day, something terrible happened. Some were buried with honors. There were a lot of people in the square, including little Hyuk Ryong-un. It was the same woman. She is also the mother of young Hyuk Ryong-un. He couldn't hold back his tears. It was from that moment that Hyuk Ryong-un went into himself and no longer wanted to practice martial arts. It was since then that this character changed and turned into boorish and offending others who are weaker than himself. and he communicated precisely on the topic with the very members of the Gang of Four Heavens. Moreover, he was popular among girls. But after our hero ended up in his body, he turned this character's hopelessness into a desire to survive by any means necessary. It can be said that the true master is back on track, but our hero still wanted not only to survive, but also to return back to the real world. Sang-won-hu interrupted the memories and thoughts of our hero and asked him what he was muttering about himself. He took the towel in his hands and told Sang-won-hu not to pay attention to it. He threw a towel around his neck and added that he wanted to entrust his friend with something else. Sang-won-hu asked what exactly he would need to do. The young master asked to introduce him to someone. That's a similar question again. The gentleman suddenly whispered something in his ear, keeping the intrigue going. He immediately screamed and said that Hyuk Ryong-un was simply crazy with such ideas. Our hero said with a confident face that everything is as he says. Sang-won-hu's surprise knew no bounds. He couldn't believe what he heard. It was about the Divine Wolf Group. This was one of the strongest groups of people in the divine cult of the sun and moon. Their best archer was called Sabu-seong. Apparently Sang-won-hu knew him very closely. Night fell. A young man stood in front of the illuminated room. Sabusan had already accepted the invitation at this time and was glad that Sang-won-hu approached him, because they had not seen each other for many years. The only strange thing is that he invited him to some strange hotel. He must have guessed something. And then the doors of the room finally opened in front of his face, and behind them stood Sang-won-hu, who began to kindly greet the guest. He was so happy about this meeting that he hugged Sabu-seong. Sabu-seong already thought without a doubt that perhaps he knew something, although this was not the person who was chasing power and wealth. Finally, Sabu-seong answered him and was no less happy about this meeting. And he also asked him in surprise how he managed to maintain such a wonderful shape because someone did not like to train a lot. He embarrassedly agreed with what was said because he did not want to contradict our guest. And then, from behind Sabu-seong, he suddenly heard his name spoken by someone's voice. Behind him stood a young master who said he was glad to see him. Sabu-seong stood in a stupor. He clearly did not expect such a turn of events. Sang-won-hu held his head in a panic and said that this was bound to happen sooner or later. Hyuk Ryong-woong suddenly bows at Sabu-seong's feet for everyone, but he saw that he became very angry, which was not entirely explainable to him at that moment. He immediately sensed something was wrong. Could his life really end earlier than it did in his novel? It turns out that as a child, the young master offended Sabu-seong when they studied together. In addition to this, he also insulted him, humiliated him, and simply did not give way. And he also considered him a weakling who was not capable of anything in this life. He, along with other students, mocked him in public. And Sabu-seong definitely did not forget about his old grievances. He kept them to himself. The young master also teased him with money, calling him a beggar. And Sabu-seong was very angry about this, because who could possibly like something like that? The gentleman called him a beggar and teased him that he would not be able to hit him. And he humiliated him by offering to take the money so that he would not be offended, although this was in fact an insult. The crowd laughed at young Sabu-seong without feeling the slightest pity for him, but he still took the money. Apparently he was really very poor, since it was useful to him. But his anger did not recede anyway. He did not stop accumulating it. But despite all the bad things that happened to him, he had support. This was precisely Sang-won-hu, who was his friend. And then Sabu-seong swore that in the future he would take revenge on Hyuk Ryong-un. He wanted to become a member of a powerful group, so that he could challenge anyone he wanted to a duel. Exactly. He will be able to take revenge on the offender. He sincerely wanted to take Hyuk Ryong-un's life. Sang-won-hu was surprised by such strange and serious desires on the part of his friend. In general, when Sabu-seong saw our hero in the body of a young master, he immediately clenched his fist tightly. And he told his friend Sang-won-hu that apparently his thirst for revenge would finally calm down. Or maybe Sang-won-hu is pursuing some other goals in this regard. Sabu-seong's friend began to calm him down because he was very angry and could not control himself. But despite his friend's support, his eyes filled with rage and he could no longer control himself. And he ran into the young master, unexpectedly for everyone who was in the room. But then I saw that the young master was on his knees and kindly greeted our guest. He looked at him in surprise, and still couldn't understand what the hell was going on here. He was embarrassed by what was happening here, and how the young master reacted to him. Sang-won-hu shouted something from behind the guest. Apparently he still wanted to calm him down. And then Sabu-seong laughed, adding that the situation was gaining new interest. Finally our hero turned to the guest, and said that to kneel before anyone from the sect means to admit defeat. Sabu-seong said that he doesn't care about Hyuk Ryong-un's defeat and asked why the hell he called him here. The young master replied that he understood everything perfectly, but still wanted to talk to Sabu-seong. He stood in bewilderment because it was very strange, and yet he agreed, but only if the young master endures something. Apparently there was some kind of catch in this. Sang-won-hu considered Sabu-seong to be a psycho, because as a young master he could defeat the best fighter of the serious group. Our hero looked at the guest and was already ready for anything because it was necessary for him to listen to him. And unexpectedly he bowed to him and even decided to thank him for this opportunity. A powerful blow from the guest immediately flew towards our hero, and he was even able to avoid this, which was very surprising. Then he realized that the blow was quite powerful and also fast, and the guest continued to deliver his blows, as if in front of him was not a person but a pair, and he was very angry that he could not hit Hyuk Ryong-un, because he spent a lot of his strength on these blows. But still, the guest did not retreat. He continued to do the same. Hyuk Ryong-un was able to dodge again, and he hit the floor with his fist. It was not easy for our hero to dodge such fatal blows. Sa Bu-seong grabbed the young master by the shirt and pulled him towards him. Fear was expressed in the eyes of the young master. He was still trying to win over the evil guest. Sa Bu-seong was pleased that at least he was able to grab him, and now he won't go anywhere. And then he pressed the young master into the floor with his hand. It turned him over. The gentleman almost lost consciousness, but one of his eyes remained open. And then the guest decided to deliver the final decisive blow to end this show, and hit him right in the face. His face was so angry that it turned red. Sang-won-hu screamed in horror, fearing for the young master's life. And Sa Bu-seong's face finally showed calmness, because he had thrown out his anger for many years of grievances. But he didn't take something into account. He was too confident at that moment. The young master managed to block this blow with both hands and was completely fine. Sa Bu-seong couldn't believe what he saw. After all, his offender did not study martial arts. Our hero, with a smile on his face, said that enough was enough, and now it was Sa Bu-seong's turn to fulfill his part of the agreement. He was unhappy. He turned around and told the young master not to hesitate. Sang-won-hu said that since the show is over, we can get to the point. He was glad that the young master was able to block that fatal blow. Our hero was delighted with himself. It turns out that his training was not in vain. The moon in the sky was already shining bright orange. It was late at night. Finally, all three calmed down and finally sat down at the table. Our hero turned to the guest. He was already full of calm and could adequately perceive what was being said to him. The young master suddenly said that he would need Sa Bu-seong's help in the future. The three of them continued to sit at the table and communicate peacefully without any fights. Sa Bu-seong said that he did not understand the essence of this conversation and why he called him. Our hero explained that everyone from Sa Bu-seong's group uses swords and spears in battle, but Sa Bu-seong will stand out among them. He asked displeasedly, "What kind of hints? Is he really being reproached for being exiled? He's the only one in the group who uses a bow." The young master replied that this is so he wants the guest to teach him what he can and knows. Sa Bu-seong was dumbfounded. He didn't believe what he just heard. He got angry and again wanted to rush at his offender, and Sang-won-hu tried to restrain him again. The guest pointed his finger at Hyuk Ryong-un and said that he never watches his language and talks nonsense. Our hero tried to justify himself. He said that he did not mean any insults by this and just wants to learn the same thing that Sa Bu-seong can do. In general, the clan tries to achieve the goal in the most convenient way. Melee weapons such as swords and spears are good weapons because they are wielded by the strongest warriors. Therefore, such warriors do not entirely respect those who wield a bow. Our hero explained to the disgruntled guest that he sees the enormous superiority of those people who wield a bow. So being able to wield a bow is a very useful feature. Sa Bu-seong and Sang-won-hu were very surprised by his words. After all, it was very unexpected. And finally, the angry guest calmed down and pulled himself together so as not to start another fight. He tried to clarify this point in order to clarify all the causes and consequences. And our hero again called him by name and added that he sees a purpose in Sa Bu-seong's skills. So we need to use this so that this does not go to waste. Finally, the guest agreed. Our hero still managed to push him through. The young master initiated him into his plans. He said that he wanted to create the most powerful squad of archers who would be better than even Sa Bu-seong's group. Moreover, he wants to make the guest the main one in this detachment. The guest's surprise knew no bounds. He did not understand whether this was a dream or reality. And then he revealed that Hyuk Ryong-un still despises him. Because due to past grievances, he could not believe that the young master had changed for the better. And then the gentleman threw off the golden and larger bedspread from the table. Under that blanket, there were 3 large chests in the form of closed safes. The guest was surprised and asked what was in them. Probably something very important. Our hero opened the chest to satisfy the curiosity of his guest, and it turned out to be a bunch of gold coins. Our hero decided that he could bribe the guest with money. Sa Bu-seong grabbed the young master sharply and was again very angry about something, and he asked how long he would continue to make fun of him. He still could not believe that there was no catch in all this. Our hero again tried to explain himself. He explained that at the moment, he did not care about jokes. After all, he is really looking for a way to lure the guest to himself so that he will fight for him. And he added that among all the famous archers, he had not seen anyone better than Sa Bu-seong. That is why our hero, despite the past, decided to schedule this meeting. And then the young master spoke about his intentions. After all, he really wants to win the competition at the festival and become the successor of the demonic clan. Sa Buseong let go of the master and was stunned. Just as before, he tried to accept this, but it was hard for him. He still couldn't believe what was happening. It simply defied his logic. Still, he said it was a stupid idea, because it sounds unconvincing. After all, the young master had clearly never been friends with his head. Our hero confirmed his words and added that since they know him as a madman, they need to prepare extremely carefully. Si Angwon-hu decided to add something of his own. He said that the young master is not just a madman. Our hero was surprised. And then he added that Hyuk Ryong-un was completely beaten. And the two of them started laughing. And the guest stood opposite them and could not believe what he saw. He took a closer look at the young master and realized that he had really changed. You can even see it in his eyes. He has a cheerful face. He even smiles, and at the same time confidence is visible in his gaze. In general, the guest seemed to calm down and again tried to be adequate. And those two saw it and looked at him. They just watched him. Our hero asked the guest again about what he thought about the plan. Sa Buseong pretended to be modest and said that he agreed, but obviously not because of the money. He explained that people usually change after being reborn, and he really wants to help the young master in this case. Our hero aroused some genuine interest in the guest. The young master raised the vessel with the drink and said that you need to drink for it, and he began to pour a drink for the guest to get him to talk even more. The night did not end, and dark clouds formed in the sky, flying in front of the moon. The no longer sober guest did not give up trying to find out from the young master what had happened to him. After all, his current behavior is impossible to believe. Our hero replied that he understood perfectly why and even expressed regret for past grievances and for everything he had caused. But he explained this only by the immaturity of that time. The guest noted that he still did not completely trust the young master. Our hero asked how he could earn his trust and support. Sa Buseong said that he wanted to personally teach the young master how to use a bow so that he could shoot well. Our hero was surprised. He couldn't believe he said that. And then the guest's rage awoke again. He thought that he had caught Hyuk Ryong-un, and it was still right that he did not trust him. He remembered again about one of his past grievances, about his long-ago training. Sa Buseong stood on the field and shot with a bow, trying to hit the target. Young Hyuk Ryong-woong watched and made fun of him. He began to hint that he had not seen a single courageous archer. And behind the young master stood the guys from his company and also laughed. But the young master didn't stop there. He said that there are rumors that Sa Buseong is impotent. But Sa Buseong still continued to train and tried to hit the target. He thought about how he trained as a boy, how he shot arrows that flew quite quickly, and he hit the target exactly because from childhood he was a good archer. And his father was nearby and supported him because his son was really good at archery. Sa Buseong was delighted with his archery and couldn't be happier. And his father was also proud of him. He liked the way he raised him. His father was also a cult archer. Therefore, he taught his son everything he knew and could. But fucking Hyuk Ryong-woong always despised Sa Buseong and mocked him for his bow skills. Although now it seems like completely different times have come for him. He looks at Sa Buseong with a kind look and without any mockery. The satisfied master got up from the table and leaned towards the guest. He asked an amazing question. He asked, "Is this really all that is required of him at the initial stage?" It turns out that our hero wanted to personally offer himself to the guest as a student, and then he politely asked the guest to teach him this art. Sa Buseong couldn't believe it even more, and our hero began to repeat that there was no malicious intent in this. But it was difficult for the guest to accept this as the truth, considering how the young master had treated him in the past. And yet he mustered up determination and faith in justice, and then raised the vessel with the drink. And he demonstrated how he drinks alcohol from this vessel. Our hero was glad that he managed to reach the guest and come to an agreement with him. Drunk Sa Buseong said that everything is valid, and he will teach the young master what he knows. Sa Buseong held out a jug of drink right in front of our hero. And with great confidence on his face, he told him that he would drink to the bottom. Our hero accepted this challenge with an equally serious face. And he did not deceive his guest. Standing on his feet, he actually drank it all to the dregs. Sangwon-hu looked at what was happening in front of him and couldn't believe his eyes. And he noted that the meeting still took place and was quite good. Two drunken bodies looked at him and said that now it was his turn. The young master handed him a jug. Sangwon-hu said that he was not resistant to alcohol, but no one listened to him. They started pouring alcohol into his mouth by force. He was furious, and someone from the company said that they needed to drink until they were blue in the face. Finally, morning came, just as clear as before. The guests slept on the bed, and Sangwon-hu was laid out on the floor. They slept half-dressed. And then Sa Buseong, barely raising his head above the bed, opened one eye. He saw his friend in front of him, sleeping on the floor, and he grabbed his head, because it hurt him very much. And then he began to remember the interesting events of the previous night. the way he expressed to the young master everything that had accumulated over many years. At that very moment, Sangwon-hu became an alcoholic and could not stop. Sabu Seong had tears in his eyes when he talked about what he had to endure in his youth because of Hyuk Ryong-woon. And our hero still continued to apologize for past misdeeds. He also again tried to extract from the young master why he nevertheless decided to create a detachment of archers. This was not entirely normal, especially for him, even though he is crazy. Rubbing his head, the awakened guest still realized that despite the oddities and degenerations of the young master, he was and remains the fourth young master of the divine cult. Although in reality, if it was a prank or a setup, the young master would have given himself away when he was very drunk. But even drunk, he repeated the same thing and did not deviate from his intentions. And then the door to the bedroom opened. Perhaps someone decided to visit them. The servant came in and said that the guests' food and clothes were already ready. Sabu Seong expressed his gratitude and asked to be taken to Hyuk Ryong-woon. The servant replied that he was already studying on the site, namely, learning to shoot a bow. Sabu Seong couldn't believe his ears, and he asked how this was even possible. The servant invited him to see for himself and told him to follow her. The target on the court was a wooden board with a red rectangle in the center. It was clear from the arrows that the young master did not know how to shoot a bow at all. In principle, he himself understood this. After all, it was obvious. And then Sabu Seong came out to him. He couldn't believe what he saw. Our hero politely greeted him and asked how he was feeling after such a stormy night. The guest replied that everything was fine. The young master said that he decided to start training on his own, but so far, he had not achieved any success. And he asked me to give him some advice on archery. The guest stood like a pillar. I didn't understand what this strange question was. Our hero continued asking his questions. First, he asked about the correct stance. Sabu Seong said that everything is fine and this stance is used by hunters. Therefore, it still has a place to be. Our hero called the guest a devilish archer and noted that he learned this stance during the Great Hunt. He asked what kind of nickname the young master had just uttered. The young master replied that the guest should not take this into his head and asked to show him a master class in archery. Sabu Seong still believed Hyuk Ryong-woon and finally took the bow into his hands. He pulled the bowstring and took aim very carefully. He had a focused and confident look. Watching this, our hero noticed that it all looked impressive. And then Sabu Seong finally decided release the string and shoot the bow. The arrow fired from his bow flew at an incredibly high speed. And in the end, she ended up right in the center of that red rectangle, around the arrow on the wooden target. Our hero was blinded by such a skill and such an impressive result. He even started clapping and praising the guest as if it were some kind of show. And Sabu Seong immediately noted that the hunting stance and the attacking stance work completely differently. And he added, if the young master trains hard, he will be able to hit the target just as effectively. Our hero impatiently suggested we start as soon as possible. The guest replied that during the day he would have a general training session with his group, so they could start the lesson after. The young master tried to hold him back, saying that training with the group was not necessary, so he could start the lesson right now. And Sabu Seong asked why he thinks so. Our hero took out some kind of scroll and reminded the guest about yesterday's deal. It turns out that they drew up an official document stating that Sabu Seong undertakes to leave his group and will have to join the new one that the young master will create. In fact, everyone was drunk during this agreement, and Sabu Seong was not fully aware of what was happening at that moment. But still he remembered this moment. He was clearly ashamed and embarrassed. The young master handed Sabu Seong this document and said that this was his contract. The guest couldn't believe it. It all felt like a dream. He asked the young master whether he regretted the amount of money he would be forced to pay, and the amount of the down payment already made. And the money that the young master will be forced to pay him under the contract exceeds his previous income by 10 times. Despite the fact that his previous group was quite famous. Our hero looked at Sabu Seong with a confident and very decisive look, and he said that it seems that the amount of future income is obvious, because Sabu Seong is a very talented archer and a master of his craft. And he added that the contract, in addition to this, also stipulates some bonuses in addition. Moreover, our hero has already delivered boxes of gold to Sabu Seong directly to his home, because they weigh so much that he himself would not be able to carry them. Sabu Seong didn't know what to tell him, and the young master added that he had high hopes for him. And then he said that this is all for the sake of the bright future of the divine cult. The guest stood and still could not understand what had happened. He simply couldn't believe what was happening. Our hero understood that he had succeeded in this part of the plan and was proud of himself. After all, he recruited a powerful devil archer as an ally. He's the best in this field, judging by the novel. He could even replace the greatest demonic tactician who was the second young master's assistant. But the point is that Sabu Seong does not yet know his greatness, since he made a name for himself after the death of Hyuk Ryong-woon. Accordingly, according to the script, they should not have met at all. But still, Our hero was surprised by the difficulties that Sabu Seong experienced in childhood, because in his novel he did not describe these moments at all. It turns out that everything happened on its own, based on the character of the characters. In general, according to the lore of the novel, the second young master trained a lot and created a powerful squad of archers, who were called the Demonic Archer Unit. This tactic worked well against Marim, but our hero still doesn't have much time to waste just like that. Therefore, perhaps his squad will not surpass the power of the squad that the second young master created. But then he remembered something else. Something very, very important to him. He needs one more unit besides the archers, a unit that will be the most powerful. To be continued. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. Dabo Recap with Love.